On an autumn night in 1887, with the high plains wind screaming against the shutters, a pounding on Elias Boone's door cut through the storm, urgent, desperate, and out of place in this lonely stretch of Wyoming. The sound didn't belong here. Not in this weather, not at this hour, and not on this road that led to nowhere but his ranch. Elias set the hammer down on the workbench, the last board half nailed to the corral fence in his mind's unfinished list. The storm had been coming all afternoon, pushing its shadow over the land until even the sagebrush looked black against the fading light. He stood still, head tilted, listening. The pounding stopped. Only the wind carried on, rattling the loose tin on the barn roof. Somewhere out in the dark, a shutter slammed hard enough to shake the frame of the house. Elias Boone had lived through worse storms, both the kind that rolled in from the mountains and the kind that tore through a man's life without warning. 10 years back, fire had taken Sarah and their boy Jacob. The flames had eaten the cabin they'd called home, leaving nothing but charred timbers and a silence that lasted long after the last ember died. Since then, the Boone Ranch had been a fortress of routine. Dawn meant feeding the cattle. Midday meant mending fences or riding the fence line. Sundown meant eating whatever he could fry in a single pan, reading from the old Bible, and turning in early. The scripture page he read most, burnt at the edges but still legible, was tucked inside its cover. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. He'd never been a preacher, but those words had clung to him the way smoke clings to a coat, even a decade later. Lightning flashed, painting the room in stark white for the blink of an eye. In that instant, the framed photograph of Sarah and Jacob caught the light, a reminder and a wound all at once. He looked away quickly, focusing instead on the flicker of the oil lamp and the hiss of the rain against the windows. Then it came again. 3 heavy knocks. No mistaking it this time. Elias moved toward the door slowly, the boards creaking under his boots. His hand brushed the cold steel of the shotgun propped against the wall, a habit, not a choice. Out here, you didn't open your door without thinking who might be on the other side. The wind drove the rain sideways, seeping through the frame as he reached for the latch. He hesitated, breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. Folks didn't just drop by in a place like this, especially not after nightfall. Whatever waited outside was bringing trouble, one kind or another. A low growl of thunder rolled across the plains. He unlatched the door. The opening was barely wide enough for a gust of wind to shove its way in, but it carried with it the sight of something, or rather someone, that didn't belong to this night. A figure, cloaked in shadow and rain, stood hunched on the porch. And then, for the briefest moment before she spoke, Elias knew with a strange certainty the storm wasn't the only thing that had come for him tonight. The figure swayed in the wind, one hand clutching the porch post for balance. A flash of lightning split the sky, and Elias caught her face. Young, maybe late 20s, hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes wide but focused. She was barefoot, her hem torn and heavy with mud, toes raw from the cold. "Please," her voice cracked, almost swallowed by the gale. "Please, let me in." Elias opened the door just enough for her to stumble through, the storm clawing at her back before he could force it shut. Rainwater pooled on the floorboards instantly, running from the ragged edges of her dress. She stood there shivering, arms wrapped around herself, a small silver cross hanging at her collarbone, catching the lamplight. He gestured toward the chair near the fire. "Sit, you're half frozen." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward the door, like it might burst open any second. Only when the latch clicked into place did she cross the room. Elias fetched a thick wool blanket from the peg by the wall and draped it over her shoulders. Her skin was cold enough to seep through the fabric. "Name?" he asked. She looked up at him, lips trembling but eyes sharp. "Clara Weston." The words came clipped, as if she'd rehearsed them. Lightning flashed again, followed by a low, distant rumble. Elias noticed her flinch, not at the thunder, but at something beyond it, the faintest echo of hoofbeats muffled by the storm. "You're hurt," he said, nodding to the streak of blood along her ankle. "It's nothing," she replied quickly, tucking her feet beneath the chair. Elias crouched beside the hearth, tossing another log onto the fire. The dry wood popped, throwing a spray of sparks up the flue. "Nobody walks out here in weather like this," he said without looking at her. "Not unless they're running from something." Clara's fingers found the silver cross at her neck, rubbing it between thumb and forefinger. "They'll find me if I stay out there," she said softly. "They'll find me and—" She stopped herself, swallowing whatever words were coming. He straightened, studying her in the firelight. There was fear in her, yes, but not the wild, panicked kind. This was the quiet, steady kind that sat deep in the bones, fear that had lived there a while. "You can change in the back room," he said, jerking his head toward the narrow hallway. "There's a dry shirt on the bed. I'll get your dress near the fire." Clara rose slowly, the blanket slipping slightly from her shoulders. Her bare feet made no sound on the worn planks as she crossed to the back. Elias turned her dress over in his hands once she was gone. Fine stitching, but torn in places. Not the kind of garment you wore for a casual ride through the prairie. From the back room came the muffled sound of a door closing. Elias hung the dress over a chair near the fire, the heat drawing steam from the soaked fabric. The wind howled around the cabin, pressing its cold breath through every crack in the walls. He'd had visitors before, drifters, lost ranch hands, a peddler once, but none who arrived with the storm biting at their heels and a name that sounded like it had been chosen on the spot. When Clara returned, the oversized work shirt hung loose on her frame, sleeves falling past her wrists. She sat again by the fire, her eyes drawn once more to the door. "You'll be safe here tonight," Elias said. For the first time, she looked directly at him. Her gaze was steady, but something in it said she didn't quite believe him. Outside, the hoofbeats came again, faint, swallowed quickly by the wind. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. Morning broke pale and thin over the high plains, the kind of light that made the frost on the grass shimmer like scattered glass. The storm had passed, but the wind still wandered the valley in restless gusts, rattling the loose boards of the barn. Elias Boone stepped onto the porch, mug of coffee in hand, and let his eyes sweep across the expanse of his land. The world felt different with another soul inside the house. 10 years of waking to nothing but the lowing of cattle and the groan of wood in the cold, and now there was the sound of movement indoors, a presence that didn't belong to him alone. Through the open door, he caught a glimpse of Clara Weston moving about his kitchen. She had gathered her dark hair back with a strip of cloth, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and was leaning over the table with a wet cloth, scrubbing away at the faint ring left by his coffee pot. By the time he stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of bread and wood smoke. She'd found the flour tin, the old cast-iron pan, and was shaping dough with quick, practiced hands. "You don't have to do that," Elias said. Clara didn't look up. "I'm better when I'm busy." He didn't press her. The truth was, he didn't mind seeing someone else at the stove. It had been Sarah's place once. For a moment, that thought settled heavy in his chest, but it passed quickly, replaced by the quiet hum of domestic life he hadn't heard in years, the scrape of a spoon, the soft thud of dough against the board. After breakfast, Clara took to sweeping the floor, starting at the front door and working her way back. She moved with the economy of someone who'd done such work before, yet every few minutes she paused, subtle enough that another man might not notice, and glanced toward the windows. Later, when he was mending tack in the corner, he saw her in the rocking chair by the front window, her knees drawn close, the blanket draped around her shoulders. She wasn't watching the fire. Her gaze was fixed far out toward the open stretch beyond his fence line, the horizon where the road cut a thin scar through the plains. Elias set the leather strap aside. "You expecting someone?" Clara's eyes flicked toward him and then away. "Just keeping watch." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind nudging the shutters. Her fingers rose to the small silver cross at her collarbone, rubbing it slowly between thumb and forefinger. The gesture was unconscious, but her grip on it tightened when the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint echo of something distant. Elias listened, but all he heard was the groan of the barn door in the gust. Whatever she thought she heard, it wasn't clear to him. By midday, she'd washed the few shirts he kept in the trunk, hanging them to dry on the line strung between two posts in the yard. He watched from the porch as she worked, the winter sun catching in her hair. She moved with quiet purpose, but always with her back angled toward the road, as if it was instinct to keep it in sight. When she came back inside, her cheeks flushed from the wind, Elias had the coffee ready. She accepted the cup with a small nod, her eyes lingering once more on the open stretch beyond the window. If she noticed his watching, she didn't say. But the unspoken truth hung between them, as steady and real as the ticking of the old clock. She was here for now, but her thoughts and her fears were somewhere out on that road. By the second day, the rhythm of their uneasy arrangement had taken root. Elias kept to his work, patching the east fence line, hauling water from the well, while Clara busied herself in the kitchen or with small repairs around the cabin. The wind had eased, but the cold clung stubbornly, seeping in through the chinks in the walls no matter how many logs he fed to the fire. Late in the afternoon, Elias brought in a saddle he'd been mending and set it on the table near the window. Beside it lay his Colt revolver, half disassembled, the barrel gleaming in the pale light. He'd been cleaning it before heading out to check the livestock. When Clara came in with a basket of kindling, her eyes fell on the weapon. She didn't hesitate. Setting the basket down, she stepped to the table, picked up the revolver frame, and with a fluid motion checked the cylinder, then eased it back into place with a soft click. Elias watched her hands, steady, sure, not the fumbling of someone unfamiliar with the weight of a gun. "You've handled one before?" he said, his voice flat. Clara didn't look up. "Everyone out here should know how." "That's not what I meant." For a moment, their eyes met. There was something in hers, a flicker of calculation, a choice being weighed, before she set the revolver down and stepped back. Elias said nothing more. Some truths came when they were ready, and pressing her now would only drive them deeper into the dark. As dusk settled, he sat in his chair by the hearth, the Bible open on his knee. He read aloud, not for her benefit, or so he told himself, but because the words carried a steadiness he needed. "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." 2 Timothy 1:7. Across the firelight, Clara paused in her sewing. Her head bowed slightly, her fingers stilling on the fabric. When she looked up, her eyes were bright in the lamplight, not from the fire's reflection, but from something unspoken, something raw. She gave a small shake of her head and bent back to her work, though her stitches were slower now, less precise. Later, as Elias banked the fire for the night, he heard the faint scrape of the rocking chair. Clara sat there, wrapped in the wool blanket, gazing out the window. Beyond the glass, the plains lay quiet under the moonlight, the road a pale ribbon stretching into the distance. "You don't sleep much," he said. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "I sleep when it's safe." It wasn't an answer, not really, but it was another thread in the pattern forming in his mind, a pattern he didn't yet have the full picture for. When he finally turned in, Elias left the revolver within reach on the table by the door. He told himself it was habit, nothing more. But somewhere deep down he knew better. The road was empty now, but it wouldn't stay that way forever. The third morning dawned clear but sharp. the kind of cold that made the boards underfoot groan when you stepped outside. Elias found Clara in the yard, sleeves rolled, a coil of wire at her feet. She was inspecting the sagging section of fence he'd been meaning to fix since before the storm. "You plan on mending that yourself?" he asked, setting down his coffee mug on the porch rail. She glanced over her shoulder, her breath making small clouds in the crisp air. "Figured I'd at least hold the posts while you work." They fell into a rhythm without much talk, Elias driving staples into the weathered wood, Clara keeping the wire taut. Now and then their gloves brushed as they passed tools back and forth, and each time Elias felt the faintest charge of something he hadn't let himself notice in years. The wind carried the sound of her humming. At first it was so soft he thought it was only the breeze catching in the wire. But then the notes took shape, a lullaby, slow and lilting, the kind that seemed older than the land itself. "Don't know that tune," Elias said, pausing with the hammer in his hand. "My mother used to sing it," Clara replied. She didn't meet his eyes, instead focusing on looping the wire through the post. Back home, before... Her voice trailed off, the unfinished thought hanging between them. He considered asking where back home was, but something in her tone told him not to press. Instead, he went back to his work, the quiet filled with her song. It wound through the air like smoke from a chimney, fragile but persistent. By midday, they'd finished the fence. Elias leaned on the post, wiping his brow with the back of his sleeve. Clara stood beside him, looking out over the open land. The horizon seemed endless, the dry grass whispering under the wind. "You've got good hands," he said. "Most folks wouldn't have lasted an hour out here in this cold." She smiled faintly. "Most folks haven't had to." That struck something in him, not just the words, but the way she said them, with the quiet weight of someone who had endured more than she'd ever tell. Back at the house, Elias set the tools away while Clara stirred a pot on the stove. The smell of stew filled the room, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like an empty house. He found himself telling her about Sarah and Jacob, how Sarah could make a pot of beans taste like Sunday supper, how Jacob had once tried to ride a calf clear across the yard. Clara listened without interrupting, her hands busy, but her eyes fixed on him when he glanced up. She didn't offer pity, and she didn't look away from the hard parts. Somehow, that made it easier to keep talking. When the meal was ready, they ate in companionable silence. Outside, the sky was darkening to the bruised colors of evening, the air holding that brittle stillness before the cold truly set in. After clearing the dishes, Clara stood in the doorway for a long while, looking out over the plains. Elias joined her, the last light catching in her hair. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. In that quiet, something in him shifted. Not much, but enough for him to know it was there. The days on Boone Ranch began to settle into a rhythm, though neither Elias nor Clara would have called it peace. Meals were simpler now, but shared. A loaf of fresh bread, coffee brewed dark and strong, and sometimes venison Elias had hunted earlier in the week. They sat across from each other at the worn pine table, the crackle of the fire filling the gaps where words did not come easily. Sometimes, over supper, Elias spoke of the land, how the winter frost could crack fence posts like brittle bones, how the soil would fight him for every stalk of barley come spring. Clara listened, her eyes bright but distant, as though part of her stood somewhere far away, out on a road she could never return to. On certain afternoons, when chores slowed, Elias would find her on the porch swing. She'd sit with her knees drawn up slightly, watching the horizon, her gaze fixed on the dusty trail leading toward town. She never admitted she was waiting for anything, but Elias noticed her body stiffen whenever a faint sound carried on the wind, a rider's hoofbeat, the creak of wagon wheels. It was in those moments that the air between them grew heavier. Elias kept his thoughts to himself, but the unease lodged somewhere deep. She was here, yet part of her life was still out there, shadowed by something unsaid. One evening, Clara began to speak about the small towns she had passed through on her way here. Her voice carried a practiced casualness, but the details were too sharp. The way she described a saloon's chipped blue door in Riverton, or the smell of saddle soap in the sheriff's office of another place she did not name. Elias caught the flicker in her eyes when she mentioned the law. She quickly moved on, asking about the nearest creek, as if her words had revealed too much. Elias let the moment pass, though the thought stayed with him. He'd seen that guarded look before, in soldiers who had come home from war with stories they would never tell in full. Still, not everything between them was shadowed. When she spoke of her mother's kitchen, or the songs her father had taught her to whistle, her voice lightened. Elias found himself listening longer than necessary, letting her draw pictures in his mind that softened the cold edges of the ranch. One morning, Clara brought in a small tin of herbs from the shed and brewed them into tea for Elias's aching shoulder. She didn't ask permission. She simply set the steaming cup in front of him and said, "It'll help." He drank without protest. It wasn't in his nature to let others tend to him, but her presence made it seem less like charity and more like something else. The silence they shared was no longer empty. It was thick with unspoken questions, with a kind of fragile trust neither wanted to break too soon. Yet beneath it all, Elias could sense a change on the wind, something moving closer. Out beyond the ranch's boundary, a hawk circled high against the winter sky, riding the cold currents. Elias watched it for a long time from the porch, the swing beside him still creaking softly from where Clara had been sitting only moments before. Whatever she was running from, he knew it hadn't stopped running toward her. It was near dusk when Elias found her in the small barn, mending one of his old saddle blankets. The fading light came through the slats in sharp, dusky beams, catching in her hair as she worked. She didn't notice him at first, or pretended not to, until his boots scraped the floor. "Blanket was fine as it was," he said. She glanced up, a faint smile touching her lips. "Fine for you, maybe, but a horse feels every rough seam." Elias leaned against the post, arms folded. There was a moment of quiet, save for the soft pull of her needle through fabric. Then he asked, not unkindly, "Who's after you, Clara?" Her hands paused mid-stitch. She didn't look at him right away, her gaze drifting instead to the thin stripe of sunset visible through the open door. "You think someone's after me? I think you don't watch the road every day for nothing." She set the blanket aside. The barn smelled faintly of hay and leather, but there was something else in the air now, something sharper. "I lost someone," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "Not to illness or accident, to a man wearing a badge." Elias's jaw tightened. "Badge don't mean much these days." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, and in them was a flash of raw anger. "No, it doesn't. Not when it sits on the chest of someone who thinks it's a shield against justice." He waited, letting the silence press her to go on. But she didn't give him a name or a place or any details that would tie her story to the sheriff he was already suspecting. Instead, she stood and brushed off her skirts. "That's all I have to say." "That's not all there is," Elias replied. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. She moved past him toward the open barn door. Outside, the sky had dimmed to a pale, bruised blue, and the wind was colder. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "keeping the rest inside is the only way to keep breathing." He followed her out, but said nothing more. There was no point in forcing it, not yet. He knew she'd speak when the weight of silence grew heavier than the truth itself. Later that night, Elias sat by the fire, sharpening the edge of his hunting knife. Clara was in the corner mending a shirt, but her hands moved slower than usual. Twice he caught her glancing at the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. It was then Elias made a quiet decision, one he didn't speak aloud, not even to himself. If trouble came, he would meet it head on. And whatever ghosts followed Clara Weston, they'd have to go through him first. The first light of dawn crept through the cracked window panes, casting pale stripes across the wooden floor. Elias was already awake, his senses sharpened like the edge of the hunting knife he had been grinding late into the night. Outside, the plain stretched wide and empty, but his gaze was fixed on the northern fence line where the ground told a story only a practiced eye could read. Fresh tracks marred the dusty earth, the deep imprints of horses' hooves pressed firmly into the dirt less than a day old. Elias knelt, running a calloused finger along the edges of the prints, noting their direction. They led away from the road, but had skirted too close to the ranch's perimeter for comfort. He stood slowly, the weight of realization settling on his shoulders. They were close, too close. Inside the cabin, Clara was stirring a pot over the fire, the faint aroma of coffee mingling with the smoke. She paused when Elias entered, her eyes locking with his, before shifting toward the door, as though already sensing the invisible threat drawing near. Elias placed the worn shotgun on the table and began methodically checking the shells in the leather pouch at his hip. The old familiar routine brought a strange comfort, steadying his nerves. "We've got company," he said quietly, though the words hung heavily in the still air. Clara nodded, stepping forward with an unspoken resolve. Her hands brushed the silver cross at her throat as if drawing strength from it. There was no fear in her eyes, only the quiet determination of someone who had long since learned that survival meant facing danger head on. "We need to be ready," Elias continued, his voice low but firm. "I don't expect they'll come knocking politely." The two moved with a practiced urgency. Elias secured the windows with wooden braces, and Clara gathered what few valuables they had, stowing them in a locked trunk. The door was bolted from the inside, heavy timber bars reinforcing it like a fortress gate. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering warnings through the dry grass and rattling the old barn's loose boards. The sky, once clear, was now streaked with dark clouds rolling in from the horizon, matching the storm that churned within Elias's chest. They worked in silence, the unspoken truth weaving a tighter bond between them, that this was no ordinary threat, and that the choices they made in the next hours could decide everything. Elias glanced at Clara, her jaw set, eyes steady. She was no longer just a frightened woman seeking refuge. She was a partner in this fight, a light against the gathering darkness. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, a distant rumble echoed across the plains, the sound of hooves pounding, growing louder by the minute. Elias lifted his shotgun, the cool metal firm in his grasp. Clara moved beside him, hands steady on the door's heavy latch. The storm had arrived. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The wind had fallen to a low moan by nightfall, a long breath drawn and held across the plains. Inside the cabin, the lamplight threw soft gold over the table where Clara sat with her hands folded, thumbs worrying the edge of her silver cross. Elias set a tin cup down and waited. He had the look of a man braced for bad weather, even when the sky was clear. "I owe you the truth," she said. Her voice was steady, as if she'd spent all afternoon sanding the rough edges off the words until they would finally pass her lips. "My name is Eleanor Weston Vaughn." Silence settled like dust. The stove ticked as the heat eased. Elias didn't move. "I took Clara from my mother," she went on. "Weston is mine. Vaughn," a thin breath, "that I got by marriage."
Elias's jaw worked once, then stilled. "Sheriff Silas Vaughn." She nodded. "He'll come. He always does when something is his and he thinks it's gone missing." The cross lay flat against her skin. She didn't touch it now. A month ago, a boy named Eli, small as a fence rail, too young for the weight he carried, saw something he shouldn't have. Money passed under a table in the back of the livery. Vaughn's men and the freighter who's been buying cattle that never had a brand. Her eyes found the lamplight and held there, as if the flame could cauterize memory. Vaughn called it a misunderstanding, took Eli into the alley to set him straight. I followed.
I thought the rest broke off, a clean cut rather than a sob. He put a bullet in the dirt by the boy's boot to scare him. The second went through the boy's chest. Elias didn't look at the door, but the line of his shoulders shifted toward it all the same. Who else saw? His 2 deputies saw enough to know which side of the story would keep them breathing. I saw all of it. She lifted her chin, and Vaughn saw me. The room felt smaller. Outside, frost traced the window glass with slow white vines. "I went home," Eleanor said, "packed a bag. He came before I was finished. He called it a family matter, said a wife doesn't wander, and a wife doesn't whisper." The smallest smile, brittle as ice. I left by the back, through the wash-yard, with nothing but what I could carry and what I couldn't bear to leave behind. "The cross," Elias said. "My mother's," she answered. "And the truth, both heavier than they look." For a long moment there was only the lamp and the low tick of cooling iron. Then Eleanor's gaze lifted to meet his. "You needed to know who I am, and what's coming."
"If you open that door again, it won't be to the wind." Elias reached for the lamp wick and turned it down until the room held more shadow than light. "Then we're past halfway measures," he said. Outside, the plains exhaled and the night seemed to lean closer. Eleanor rose from the table as if the chair had burned her. "I should go before dawn," she said. "If I leave now, maybe I can pull them away from you. They won't waste time on a rancher with no quarrel in town." Elias didn't answer right away. He looked past her to the dark window, to the vague reflection of his own shoulders squared against it. 10 years of keeping his head down, of letting the world pass by like a river he no longer meant to cross. Somewhere along the way, he had started calling that caution. Tonight, it felt like surrender. "You won't get 3 miles on that road without being seen," he said. "And if you make it past the ridge, you'll still be alone when they catch you." He stepped closer. "Alone is how you've stayed alive. It's not how you end this." She shook her head.
"I won't have your blood on my hands." He reached for the small silver cross at her throat, not to take it, only to rest his palm over it, as if steadying a compass. His voice was quiet, the words chosen like rounds before a fight. "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." Isaiah 54:17. He let the verse sit between them. Not a spell, not a boast, but a line he could stand on without shaking. "You don't run anymore," he said. "Not from my land." Eleanor searched his face, testing for the kind of conviction that fails in the first hard wind. She found none. "Then what?" she asked. "What does not running look like?" "Looks like planning," he said. He laid it out in plain terms, soldier simple. Shutters barred, lamps blacked to keep their eyes night sharp. The spare Winchester checked and loaded, extra shells in the blue biscuit tin by the stove. He'd take the porch, good cover, clean line to the gate. She'd stay by the jamb inside, aiming chest high, firing only if a man crossed the threshold. No talk at the door longer than it took to say who owns this land and what lies won't buy here. She listened without flinching. "And if they set fire to the barn?" "We cut the horses loose before they ride in," he said. "If we lose wood, we lose wood. We don't lose breath over it." He paused. "There's a bucket line ready from the well, but I won't split our strength for a building." Her mouth tightened, then eased. "You've thought about this before." "I've thought about how quickly a life can burn," he said. "That's different." They moved then, each to their tasks, quiet, efficient, as if the house itself had decided with them. Elias doused the lamps until only a coal's glow lived in the stove. Eleanor checked the rifle sights, hands steady, shoulders squared to the door. When the last bar slid into place, Elias stood beside her and set the shotgun within easy reach. "From here on," he said, "we go forward only." Outside, the planes held their breath, and somewhere far off, a single hoof struck stone like a spark. The first sign was the dust, thin at the horizon, then thickening into a low, traveling cloud. Elias and Eleanor watched it gather through the narrow crack between shutter and frame, the house dark behind them, every lamp snuffed. Hoofbeats followed, steady as a clock. 3 riders, maybe 4 at first count. Then, as the wind shifted, it resolved to 3. Elias eased the door bar up, just enough to step onto the porch and take his place beside the post. The boards were cool under his boots. He rested the shotgun along his forearm, barrel angled low, a man ready to speak before he was forced to fire. Inside the threshold, Eleanor stood a pace back and to the right, Winchester to shoulder height, sightline past his left arm. They had rehearsed the geometry of it without a word. The riders slowed at the gate, letting the horses blow and paw. The lead horse, a rangy bay, tossed its head. The man on its back sat straight as a fence post, oilskin slicker shedding what little mist the morning held. Sun caught the badge on his vest with a brief, cold flash. "Boone!" The voice carried easily, practiced to reach across a street or a gallows yard. "Silas Vaughn, duly sworn, got business at your door." Elias didn't answer. He let the quiet say its piece. The 2 deputies flanked Vaughn, one older with a scar at the jawline, the other young enough to still look for permission before he breathed. Vaughn nudged the bay forward 2 steps. "Lookin' for my wife," he said, casual as a man asking after a missin' mule. "Answers to Eleanor. Some folks hear Clara. Came out this way in a hurry and forgot what belongs where." Inside, Eleanor's breath steadied, a small, controlled thing. Elias didn't turn. He spoke to the open yard. "You've ridden past a gate that's not yours," he said. "State your lawful claim, or turn your horses around." Vaughn laughed, a single bark, not amused. "Lawful claim? A man's claim to his own household seems lawful enough. Woman's been confused is all. My duty to fetch her home." The younger deputy shifted in the saddle, eyes skimming the porch shadows. The older one watched Elias's hands. Elias kept his voice even. "No one's fetched from this threshold. If you've got paper signed by a judge, you can hold it up right there at the rail, and I'll read it from here. Otherwise, you'll be keeping to your side of my fence." Vaughn's smile thinned. "Papers for men who need it." He leaned a touch in the saddle, finger tapping the edge of his badge. "I carry mine right here." The bay sidled, iron shoes scuffing the packed earth. Vaughn stilled the horse with his knees and let his gaze travel the porch, the dark window, the door. "Last time I'll say it plain," he called. "Send the woman out. She walks back with me. No trouble touches your door." Elias felt the house at his back like a living thing, the weight of wood, the set of hinges, the steady presence behind him that was Eleanor. He shifted the shotgun a fraction, bringing the muzzles level. "You've had your say," he answered. "Now you'll have my line. No trespass, no seizure, no lies past my rail. Turn around." Silence clicked into place, tight as a set trigger. Vaughn's hand drifted, almost idly, toward the butt of his revolver. Inside the jam, Eleanor's cheekbone caught a thin blade of light. The rifle sight held steady on center mass. The yard and everything in it waited for the next breath. Vaughn's fingers hovered near his revolver, a lazy man's dare. The bay shifted under him, ears pinned, breath smoking in the cold. From the shadow of the doorway, Eleanor stepped half a pace forward, enough for her face to catch the gray light, not enough to break cover. Her voice carried clean across the yard.
"Deputy," she called to the older one, "you were in the alley behind Kearns's livery that night Eli died. You held the boy's elbow. You told him to mind his tongue." The older deputy's jaw ticked. He didn't answer. She turned her gaze to the younger man. "You were there too. You kept looking at the blood on his shirt. Your hat had the frayed band, 3 loose threads by the buckle. You couldn't stop staring." Color rose in the young deputy's face. His horse sidled. He checked it with a sharp tug that fooled no one. Vaughn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Listen to her," he said. "Woman's got a storybook mind, spinning yarns to dress up a runaway's shame." Elias didn't move from the post. "She named a place you didn't," he said evenly. "She named a boy you won't." Eleanor kept going, voice steady. "First shot went wide, into the dirt by Eli's boot. The second tore his chest. You called it a warning that stuck, Sheriff. Then you told your men to fetch a preacher before the body cooled, so folks would talk about sin instead of bullets." The older deputy's gaze dropped to his reins. The younger swallowed hard. Vaughn leaned forward in the saddle, slicker creaking. "That's enough, Eleanor. You're coming home. I'm not repeating myself in front of some fence mender who thinks a porch rail makes him a judge." "Home?" Eleanor's laugh was small and sharp. "You mean a cell with curtains. You mean a whisper kept behind locked doors." Vaughn's hand slipped a fraction closer to the pistol. "Last time," he said, the pleasant tone stripped from his voice. "Walk out, now." Elias shifted the shotgun just enough to write the truth in the air. "Hands where I can see them," he said. "You, Sheriff, and both men with you. You reach for iron on my rail, I answer." The young deputy's hands lifted from his thighs, slow, palms open. The older one hesitated, then did the same, eyes flicking once toward Vaughn, as if asking permission he knew he wouldn't get. Eleanor's rifle sight held steady on the hard center of Vaughn's vest. "Say the boy's name," she said. "Say Eli. Say it where your men can hear you." The sheriff's mouth thinned to a blade. "You don't give orders here," he hissed. For a heartbeat, the yard froze, the horses, the wind, even the cold itself. Then Vaughn's thumb nudged the hammer strap aside, and his hand dropped. Elias exhaled once, a measured breath he had been saving for a decade, and brought the muzzles level. Vaughn's gun cleared leather a half-inch before the world decided. Elias fired. The double blast cracked the morning like a board, both barrels speaking in one bright, concussive breath. Buckshot chewed the porch post and tore through Vaughn's slicker at the shoulder, spinning him sideways in the saddle. The bay reared, scream sharp as metal, and the sheriff's hat flew, trading places with the breath in his chest. He clutched the wound, red blooming against oilskin, eyes wide with a stunned human astonishment that this day could hurt him. "Hands high," Elias barked, smoke drifting past his cheek. He broke the gun, shells hissing, and fed 2 fresh rounds with a calm that looked like fate. The young deputy froze, both palms up, reins dangling.
The older one half drew, then thought better of dying for another man's lie, and let the iron slide back into its seat. Eleanor held her line at the jam, the Winchester steady, no tremor in the sight picture she had chosen, and would keep as long as breath asked for it. "Back your horses," Elias said.
"You crossed my rail with a story that won't stand. You'll carry a different one home." Vaughn wheeled the bay a foot, then another, trying to find a posture that wasn't pain. "You'll hang for this," he spat, voice shredded at the edges. "You aimed first," Elias replied, "and you brought guns to a door you were warned to leave alone." The sheriff's gaze slid past Elias toward the shadow where Eleanor stood. "Wife," he rasped, "come down. This is the last mercy you'll be offered." Eleanor stepped a fraction deeper into the light. "Mercy looks different from where I've been made to stand," she said. "Ride away, Silas. Tell the town you didn't find what you think you own." The young deputy shifted, voice small. "Sheriff?" The older one kept his eyes on the ground. "We should go." Elias lifted the reloaded shotgun, not menacing, only certain. "Gates that way," he said. "Take it while you're breathing. Next time, I don't waste shot proving a point." For a long heartbeat, nothing moved but the steam from Vaughn's torn slicker. Then the bay stepped backward, one careful hoof at a time. The deputies turned with it, the trio edging toward the road as if the earth itself had tilted. At the gate, Vaughn found his hat, set it on with a bloody hand, and glared back. "This isn't finished." "It is here," Elias said. The horses took the road, and the yard exhaled. Inside, Eleanor lowered the rifle by inches, then kept it near. Elias closed the door on the cold and on what would surely return. When the dust finally thinned at the gate, the yard unclenched. Steam lifted from splinters in the chewed porch post and vanished into the cold. Elias held the shotgun leveled until the hoofbeats faded to memory, then lowered it the way a man eases a door shot on a sleeping room. Inside, Eleanor set the Winchester on the table and only then felt the tremor steal through her hands. Elias slid the bar into place, fed a split to the fire, and stepped back onto the porch to read the damage. Buckshot seeds in gray grain, ragged wood where the post had taken the worst of it. He returned with a basin and a clean rag. Eleanor reached to take them. He shook his head and wiped soot from her cheekbone, then the wind grit along her jaw. Neither spoke. The quiet between them felt earned. "They'll be back," she said. "Maybe with paper this time." She meant a warrant. He heard both threat and theater in the word. "Likely," he answered. "Paper or more guns. Either way, we keep our ground." She moved to the window and lifted the curtain with 2 fingers. The road lay pale and empty. "The young one wanted to turn," she murmured. "The older bent but didn't break. Wind will choose for them." "That's a lever," Elias said. "Press the right man and a door opens." He cut kindling until the wood box heaped, while Eleanor coiled rope, counted matches, and set a second bucket line from the well to the porch. He slipped to the corral to loose the horses, spoke to each with a touch to the neck, and left the gate thrown wide. Night took the yard while he worked. By the time he returned, the house had settled into its watch. Elias set the shotgun on the table and reloaded with patient, practiced motions. Eleanor drew the Winchester's bolt, checked the chamber, and eased it home. The sounds were small, exact, and final. "Do you regret the shot?" she asked. He considered, then shook his head. "I regret the need for it," he said, "not the truth of it." They let the silence measure the house. Beyond the fence, a coyote called and another answered, the plains taking attendance after trouble.
The ordinary dangers resumed patrol. Eleanor breathed deeper than all day. "He'll call me runaway and call you thief," she said. "He'll tell the town he's collecting property." "Then we'll live so that's a foolish story to keep," Elias answered. He turned the lamp wick down until the stove carried the room. They took their places, he by the door, she where the window could be watched unseen for now. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. By week's end, the ranch sounded different, lighter, as if the boards had stopped bracing and learned to breathe again. Mornings came pale over the high plains, and ordinary tasks felt newly important. Elias planed the chewed porch post to clean wood, shavings curling at his boots. Clara followed with sandpaper and linseed oil, rubbing until the grain drank deep and the scars turned quiet. They didn't speak of the morning at the gate. The work spoke for them. Inside, life arranged itself into modest patterns. Flour dust drifted across the pine table where Clara kneaded dough. A kettle ticked inside. Socks steamed on a line near the stove. Elias repaired a harness at the window and found, to his surprise, that thread through leather steadied his hands more than any drink ever had. Now and then Clara hummed a nameless tune, and the house carried it room to room like a gentle messenger. They moved easily around each other. He set a cup where she could find it without looking up. She laid a folded rag by his elbow just as he noticed the need. Their quiet shifted from wall to table, something to set things on, not hide behind. A peddler's wagon creaked up the lane with coffee beans and stories thin as thread. He didn't stay long, only long enough to trade for eggs and mention that talk in town was changing its coat. Folks, he said, were beginning to wonder about men who wore the law like armor. He tipped his hat without naming Clara and rolled on. After chores, Elias took the guitar down from the peg where it had hung like a kept silence. The strings were dull. He tightened them carefully, listening for the old notes to come home. The first chord was crooked, then less so. He kept at it until the instrument stopped sounding like a stranger. Clara didn't praise or prod. She sat by the window with her mending and let him hear for himself that the music still lived. Toward evening he cleared a space on the bench and laid out straight-grained pine. He measured twice, marked once, and cut the rails for a small crib. No announcement, no reason given. When Clara passed, she didn't ask. She set a folded square of calico near the shavings, a bright scrap she'd been saving, and later stitched it into a small quilt top while the lamp made a soft island of light. The saw rasped, the needle whispered. Future and present took turns in the same room and minded each other. Outside, cattle nosed the last frost from the grass. The sky kept its winter blue, then folded into a steady gold that made even the old fence posts look kind. Elias walked the perimeter at dusk and let the ground tell its truth. Who had passed, what had changed, what would hold. He stopped at the northern line and looked toward the road. Empty. Not safe exactly, just empty. When repairs reached the barn, Clara climbed the ladder and handed down tools while Elias replaced a rafter tie. Sawdust salted his shoulders, and for a moment he looked younger than his years. He laughed once, short, surprised, like a man hearing his own voice after a long winter, and the sound startled them both in a pleasant way. Clara shook her head, smiling. Evenings settled gentle. Supper, a few words, sometimes a hand resting on a chair back, a heartbeat longer than needed. The old clock found its tick. Elias left the front lamp low and the door bar ready, not as a dare, but as the good habit of people who mean to see another morning. On the last light of a long day, he lifted the crib side rail into place and tapped the dowels home. The joinery seated with a quiet, perfect click. He ran a thumb along the smooth edge and didn't say what the piece was for. Clara folded the small quilt and set it where tomorrow's sun would find it. By late afternoon, the light turned honeyed, laying quiet on the yard and on the front door Elias had planed smooth the day before. He set a small box on the step, chisel, mallet, carpenter's square, a stub of chalk, then wiped the plank with a clean rag until the grain rose under his palm. Clara came out carrying a tin of oil and a folded cloth, the swing of the screen door easing shut behind her. "You sure about the spot?" she asked. "Center, shoulder high," he said. "A man should see it before he can reach for the latch." He chalked 2 straight guidelines, checked them twice, and marked the first letter. The wood was dry and willing, a good listener. He set the chisel and tapped. The letter E opened like a door. Stroke by stroke, the name took shape. Elias Boone. He brushed the curls aside and began again, slower now, to leave room where room was due. Clara Weston. When he finished, both names sat true and even, the cuts clean, the depth matched as if measured against the same breath. Clara dipped the cloth in oil and worked it gently into the carving. The letters darkened and shone, the grain rising around them like water around stones. She pressed her thumb to each name, not to claim, only to promise she would keep them from weather and from forgetting. Elias lifted the chalk again and marked a smaller line beneath the names. He looked to Clara. She nodded once. With a steadiness he had not felt in years, he cut the words that had steadied him long before tonight. "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua 24:15. They stood back. The door caught the sun and sent it across the yard in a warm stripe. Clara rested her hand lightly above the verse. Elias removed his hat. No speech, no formal prayer, only a long breath shared, the kind that makes a room feel larger without anyone moving. Elias rubbed a final wash of oil over the plank, sealing light into wood. He set the tools back in the box, then left it open on the step, as if the house might ask for another line someday. The screen door clicked once, and a faint smell of coffee wandered out to meet the evening. They ate early, bread, beans, and the last of the apples, and watched the color drain from the hills until the sky held only a calm workman's blue. Elias tuned the guitar and found a single steady note that hung in the doorway like a lantern. He looked at the new carving, then at Clara. "We're not running anymore," he said. She answered by drawing the bolt with a sure hand and setting the lamp low so the verse held its own small fire. Beyond the rail, cattle shifted and settled. A meadowlark made one last call and fell silent. The wind changed to a softer key and began at last to sound like home. Before dusk fully gathered, Clara took a small brush and worked oil into the bevels so dust would not settle where the letters cut. The silver cross at her throat caught the same amber light as the door, a quiet rhyme that made Elias think of the way certain lines meet on a map. He fetched 2 iron hooks he had meant to hang years ago and set them beside the frame, one for his hat, one for hers. Simple things that looked, tonight, like a decision given hardware. In the morning they would sand the last roughness, polish the latch, and sweep the shavings from the step for birds tomorrow. Maybe, Elias said, he'd take a board to the north fence and mend where winter gnawed. Maybe, Clara said, she'd stitch lining for the crib so small hands would find only softness. Neither spoke of trouble. They had made a thing that spoke for them, a sign plain as daylight. Anyone riding by would learn what the house knew. If these quiet vows and weathered timbers stir old memories of hands that worked, doors that sheltered, and faith that held, ride with us. Share what this ending woke in you, and subscribe for more true Wild West stories. Grit, grace, and second chances, told plain as a prairie sunrise today, friends.